Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is tuned into this webinar. My name is Venkat Raman, and I take care of the market development and learner success for FutureSkills initiative at NASSCOM. And it's been my privilege and honor to be the moderator for this session today. So thanks for all the audience who have tuned into this webinar. And I can assure one thing, that this 1 hour that you spend here would definitely be worthy. So today's topic is actually on something which is very, very relevant in today's world, which is on effective communication. Now, communication has always been important, but it just got amplified with the, I would say, thanks to COVID, the post-pandemic world, where we're talking about virtual world, communication becomes absolutely important. That sort of defines how successful you can be, because on one end you have the talent, the skills, but if you're not able to communicate that effectively, then you're not probably able to get the right benefit out of it. So a lot of times what happens is when you talk about communication, usually many tend to attribute communication to vocabulary, but there's a lot more to it. It's all about body language, voice modulation, tonality, and one most important thing which a lot of people actually ignore is the listening skills. So what I would request the audience as well is to listen very carefully today. And as I mentioned, I'm sure you will get a lot of value from this session. Now, why is this such an important topic? Now, I've been with the corporate world for a little more than 2 decades, and I've been working with several organizations. I've been to the campus for hiring. And one of the common things that I see there is communication skill is definitely a gap that we're trying to address. Students are extremely good when it comes to technical capabilities, but they're not able to articulate that really well. And that's where they're losing out. And we're very privileged to have Deakin as a partner here. I don't think Deakin needs an introduction, but anyway, you'll hear more about that. But they're actually partnered with us, and they're offering a couple of their courses as well on the platform. We'll talk a little more about that. But just to wrap up on this particular thing before I pass it on, is one, if you look at India as a country, we speak about 22 languages in India. So it is not the native, it's not the mother tongue. So there's nothing wrong that you have to learn a new thing. It's important, and there's a way you can learn it, and that's what we're bringing it to you. The other thing that's talked about, the virtual world, becomes extremely important when it comes to communication. And the last thing is the gig economy. So we are all moving towards the gig economy, and if the virtual world continues for a longer time, this is sort of guaranteed that will amplify the need for the gig economy. And in the gig economy, the key thing is everybody is like an entrepreneur. You're actually marketing yourself, you're selling yourself. So the need for these skills becomes even more greater than what it is today. So with that, I would just like to talk about the flow of the session. We would have about 10 minutes spent on the overview of Deakin University in India, and then we would have a keynote address on this particular theme, which is effective communication, a critical skill for the new normal of work. So let me introduce Ravneet. Ravneet is currently the Global Deputy Vice President and CEO South Asia of Deakin University, Australia. She was also awarded Exceptional Woman of Excellence in the World Economic Forum 2019. With over 27 years of experience in the international education sector, she has been instrumental in establishing global collaboration and strategic partnership. So, Ravneet, over to you.
Thank you very much, Venkat, and good afternoon, good morning, friends. I'm not sure anyone has joined here where I should be saying good evening, but anyway, in this global world as we live, time is no bar, and I think boundaries are no bar anymore because everything is virtual at the moment. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Venkat. I totally agree with you that the skill focus, as we call it, life skills, in this new normal as we live is a very important part of, I think, understanding where we are and where the future of the businesses is going to be. What we hear today with the new mutated version of the virus coming in and all of that happening, we don't see things opening up very soon. So I think this is going to be life for a while at the moment. Having said that, I think what is also important is to note is that in this new normal, what importance the skills have is much, much more than what it had before. And especially digital learning skills or digital knowledge skills is extremely important, because we sort of tend spending time on the computer in front of the screen for 8 to 10 hours, whereas before No one had heard anyone doing that for so long. So this is a big, big change for all of us. Everything is happening virtual in our lives. India is working towards a dedicated skill development mission into the future, which was well addressed in a digital conclave in 2020 August on World Youth Skills Day. And as you know, NSDC and a whole lot of other areas, including the NASSCOM FutureSkills platform, is doing a lot to ensure they are able to bridge the gap between what life skills people have and how we can help improve those life skills. Skills gap continue to be a high in-demand skills across jobs and across job changes in the next 5 years. Online learning and training is on the rise, but looks different for those in employment and those who are unemployed. Through its corporate division of DeakinCo, Deakin aims to prepare India for its skills of building for the future and for future academic and industrial collaborations. In the last 2 decades, more than 13,000 Indian students have benefited with jobs and skills essential to make them employable worldwide. DeakinCo is focused on improving business performances through capability development. It focuses on leadership, human-centric skills, emerging technical skills and capability, and complement automation, augmentation, and industry transformation. Deakin University was established in 1974, and it is ranked among the top universities under 50 and the top 1% of any world ranking in the world. As one of Australia's leading tertiary education provider, Deakin teaches over 60,000 students, and now all of them online, with more than 3,000 students in the subcontinent. Deakin was the first university to establish its presence in India in 1994, and since then it has forged a bond of commitment, excellence, trust, transparency through partnerships under the umbrella of education and training. Through innovative collaborations, we have nurtured our intellectual capacity and capability with India across research, training, and learning. Over the 2 decades, Deakin has developed strategic partnerships with companies such as Reliance, KPMG, Tata, GE, Public Health Foundation of India, Biocon, and a whole lot of other academic institutions such as IIT Madras, IIT Hyderabad, and the Indian School of Business. Through meaningful collaborations and engagement, we aim to continue to build a strong sense of community with our students, staff, alumni, and partners, as well as industry, government, and community. We are known as a highly connected and a collaborative institution, and we aim to focus on helping work with NASSCOM to build human-centric and technical skills for the young India. Friends, I've got here with me a friend, a colleague, and someone who's been very, very centric to building the partnership with India in the area of skill development. It's a great pleasure to introduce Glen Campbell, the Executive Director and CEO of DeakinCo, the corporate arm of Deakin University. Glen carries with him an experience of working with government and education sector alongside an experience of operating his own management advisory business. His experience includes a primary focus on strategy, public policy, change leadership, stakeholder relations, product development, service delivery, governance, and people and culture. His time in senior leadership roles has brought wider exposure internationally across the Asia-Pacific region, specifically New Zealand, China, Singapore, Taiwan, and India. Glen has held senior board appointments related to his work, most notably in public policy and education. Currently being the CEO of DeakinCo, he is responsible for strategy and international engagement across the whole upskilling area, not just in Australia, but internationally. Glen, I now request you to share your thoughts with the group.
So while Glen gets started, just one message for the audience here. So audience, all of you would be on mute. So I would request you to post your questions on the chat window. We will moderate that and pick up the ones and post it to Glen and Ravneet as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Venkat, and thank you, Ravneet, for that introduction. I'd like to start today with a poll and get your input before I do proceed into the presentation today. So if we can get that poll up, here we go. What we'd like you to do is to be able to select one of the following. In the new normal of work, which of these skills do you consider will be the most in demand by employers? And there's 5 to choose from. So if you can start to make your selections, and then we'll be able to share those answers in a couple of moments. Do you think it's collaboration, communication, critical thinking, digital literacy, or problem solving? Okay, I hope most of you have had a chance to put an answer in there. How are we going with the responses? Okay, we might end that poll right now, and let's have a look at the results. Great. Can we see the results?
Are you able to see it, Glenn?
Sure.
No.
So we just call it out while this comes up. We see the highest being on communication, which is 47%. Next is collaboration, which is 26%. Then we have critical thinking, 11%, problem solving, 9%, and digital literacy, 7%.
Right. Yep, so they're all up. Okay, well, I suppose it's not surprising that most of you, that 47% selected communication given the topic today. But what I also want to say that the other 4 are really not that far behind when it comes to what's most in demand. Now, there are a lot of thanks for having that poll and contributing. What we're actually seeing and we've been seeing this now for a number of years, but all of these skills are in demand right now. And depending if you do follow different types of consultancy firms and recruiters, LinkedIn, wherever it might be, you'll see some variations in this. But one of the common threads that's been happening for at least 5 years that I've been tracking this is communication being either number 1 or within the top 5. And in many cases, when it does get displaced, communication is still an underpinning element to the others. So even if we think of collaboration there, which I think was sitting at number 2 with about 26%, if my eyes don't deceive me and my memory isn't failing me, to collaborate effectively, you also need to communicate. So these skills are very much interconnected. Let me tell you a little bit about what DeakinCo did around about 6 years ago. We set out to look at what were going to be the most important skills as we moved into the future of work. The way we approached this was to partner with IBM Watson and start to analyse both what industries and governments were thinking, but also what was the job market doing. So we actually looked across capability frameworks from industry, individual organisations and governments around the world. We fed as many as those into IBM Watson as we could to see the commonalities across industries and across geographies. Then we looked at around 6,000 to 8,000 jobs from, again, across industry and across geographies. We fed that into IBM Watson. We then had 2 pieces of analytics that looked at the commonalities in the capability frameworks and the commonalities in the jobs that were being applied. Then we looked at combining those two sets to see where those parallels were. Now, like I said, that was 6 years ago. We still do a report every couple of years, but all of our research, including that early research, formed the basis of some of the early work of the World Economic Forum and the OECD. And you'll see that our research and our partnership with Deloitte in this particular area of research continues to come to the fore in the updates of thinking around what's the future of work. But let's have a look at communication and what we mean by communication. So as I said, it's been the #1 most in-demand skill for at least 5 years, which sort of brings another question, which is, why haven't we been able to resolve this yet? Why is it that demand for communication still is above our ability as humans to supply it? And I'm talking about in the business world. Or if we put this another way, why do we as humans still have difficulty communicating effectively? And like I said, what I'm going to focus on when I talk about communication is business communication, not our social communications. It's an important distinction, and one that I hope everyone gets when they enter business. And one of the things that we've certainly started to see is almost a melding of those two different styles of communication, yet there's a significant need to have those different styles of communication. One of the things that we need to look at is to, in effect, rethink the way that we learn about communication and practice it to improve. When it comes to communication and other human-centered or professional skills, knowing how to do it is only the first step. We have to actually get better at doing. Here at DeakinCo, what we've done in the way that we structure our continuous learning and workplace learning is to flip the traditional model from learn, assess what you've learned, then go out in the world and do. We flipped that around and said, well, okay, learn and learn in as many ways as you can, then practice it or do the do, and then assess. So what we're doing is placing the importance of assessment not on the knowledge gained, but on the application of the knowledge. And that's a really important distinction, because if you talk to any business leader, do this when you go back to work, or this afternoon if you see your boss probably on a call like this, because you're probably not in the office. So I haven't seen my boss in over 10 months. So I've been sitting pretty much looking at this same screen for the past 10 months. But ask them what's most important to them, whether it's about communication, problem solving, critical thinking, innovation. What they're interested in is that, can someone do this? And recruiters as well will clearly express this. What they're interested in is someone with a track record of solving problems, or not someone that has a track record of studying how to resolve problems. Like I said, studying and learning is only the first step, and in business, stopping at the learning is just not enough. But let me just talk a little bit more about the elements of what I'm talking about when I talk about communication. So communication, we know, is written, it's oral, but it's also visual. And those three, you could put them as a Venn diagram if you really wanted to. They overlap and intersect. There's formal communication and there's informal communication, still in the business world. And it's important to know when to use the right version of that. Now, what we're seeing is that the formal and the informal are coming closer together, but there's still distinctions here. What's important with communication is making sure that you have the right form for the right audience on the right topic. And so this is what I'm talking about here, is context. Right form, right audience, right topic. The way you structure communication is critical. The structure of it is what brings clarity. Now, I'm sure everyone has come across something where they've read or heard someone and they've got to the end of it and gone, I absolutely have no idea what that was about. this is where structure becomes important. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that. I'm going to just continue on around some of these elements. The other part about communication is knowing your audience. Do you need visuals? Do you need text? Do you need video? It's not it's not about how you wish to communicate, it's how they wish to receive the communication. So when I have new staff members start with me, one of the very first things I tell them is that I'm a visual person. So if they're going to write a report to me, please don't make it 10 pages of text, because it's not going to work. If you can put a visual, an infographic, a table, a graph, whatever it might be, as the saying, there's an old saying, of course, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that works for me. Color works for me. So if you're going to put a chart or an infographic in, don't make it black and white. So these are the things about knowing who your audience is. Now, I'm not sure how Venkat likes how he likes to absorb his information, but don't make the assumption that the way I like it is the way that Venkat would like it, because that may not be correct. So it's about understanding what your audience wants and how they're receptive to it. If you've got a big audience like this, the best way to do that is actually to make sure you're using different types of cues. There's another saying that I learned early on in my career, which was about when you're talking or communicating with someone, you tell them what you're about to tell them, then you tell them, and then you remind them what you told them. So you're repeating yourself so that you're trying to make sure that the elements that are important to you stick and sink in. The next part of this is actually also about communicating appropriately given the circumstances. So again, let me give you an example of that one. So in a past life of mine, in a past role, I worked for a large government here in Australia. And I'm going back a little bit of time now. I won't say when, but it was a while ago. But we were really at the start of when governments around the world were starting to seriously consider the impacts of climate change and creating policies around climate change. And there was a particular tension. I was working in the environment area, and there was a tension between environment and economics. And a lot of people at that time thought that you can't have both. How the world has quickly changed, thank goodness, because you can't have one without the other. But I had a group, and I was facilitating a session with a group of business leaders and policymakers who, from the environment sphere, that were really frustrated that they couldn't get their message across to government about the importance of the environment for the economy. So they were all sitting there tearing their hair out. What I asked them to do was to think about who their audience was. It took a little bit of time before they got the right audience, because the right audience was, in fact, the leader of the government, the premier, the state leader, the most senior public servant, the most senior politician. Once they got that, I asked them the question of, who does this person listen to? And got them thinking about that. And I said, okay, so what is it about these people that gets through to the Premier? And once they got that, they were then able to focus in more around how they could communicate their message about the importance of the environment to the economy that would grab the attention of their prime audience. Outcome of this one, Victoria introduced one of the very first climate change acts in the world. So they went from not being able to be heard to actually having one of the first pieces of climate change legislation in the world. And that was because they were able to communicate correctly to the prime audience, the man that had the power, in a language that he understood and he could relate to. So when you're looking at your communication, you need to bring in the right dose of what I call the 4 E's. And the right dose, I'll use the Goldilocks principle to explain each one of these. If you're not familiar with the Goldilocks principle, it's named after the fairy tale, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. It's really saying that there is too much, not enough, or the right spot. So the first one of those is engagement. You need to be able to engage and connect. Engagement's about connection. You need to be able to connect with your audience. So in that example I had, the way to connect was to understand what pulled their strings, what pressed their buttons, what is it that's going to get their attention. The second is expertise. You need to be able to lend credibility to what you communicate. So if I was to talk to you about COVID, and I started talking to you about the way it spread, then I wouldn't have a lot of credibility because I'm not an epidemiologist and I really don't understand how that works. But I could talk to you about COVID in terms of where I'm finding valuable or trustworthy material about COVID and how it spreads. I could talk to you about my personal experience of having a COVID test. And if any of you have had one, it's not a pleasant experience, as you know. And if you haven't had one, if you do, you'll really understand the significance. But having expertise, it's either that you're bringing that expertise. And if you remember, I started off by talking to you about what DeakinCo has done in this particular space. But if you don't have that expertise, you need to be able to explain how you're bringing this information. So if I'm talking to you about COVID, it's not because I'm an epidemiologist or a virologist, it's because I'm looking at trustworthy sources of information and I'm bringing that together to you. And if you need to, you can also go to those sources to find more information. So the communication it's not an art. It's a bit of an art, but there's a lot of structure that goes in behind it. And over time, we take this for granted. But in the business world, it's very different than how we do this privately. The third E, evidence. Again, using the Goldilocks principle, if you don't have enough evidence, you're probably going to be dismissed. Your thought, not your job, although that could be a consequence. If you have too much, you are going to risk losing the audience. Let me tell you about another, and this is interesting. This is actually another example of mine when I was in government. And I could have picked another one, but this is the one that immediately came to my mind because I was working with a group of scientists, climate scientists from the same area. Now, this one was actually about the increasing level of bushfires here in Australia. As if you are familiar with Australia, we're one of the most bushfire-prone countries in the world, along with California and Croatia. Now, we had a new minister. The minister insisted on his briefs being no more than 2 pages, which is sort of fair enough when you consider the amount of work that a minister would have to look at. And he said, look, you can include attachments if it's relevant to your main points. So one of my jobs was to field all the information before it went to the minister. And I received a briefing that, sure enough, met the 2 pages brief. In fact, it was even shorter. It was only 1 page, but it had about 35 pages of attachments. The person that wrote that brief could not figure out how to condense their scientific findings into 2 pages. Needless to say, that did not reach the minister, and it went back, and someone else had to actually work with that scientist to help them bring out what were the critical salient points of that 35 pages. It might have been longer than 35 pages, but I only care to remember 35 pages. But that's about your evidence. And believe me, that 35 pages of evidence was great, but it wasn't being read because it was just too much and too technical. It missed the audience. The other and final E is empathy. You need to be able to demonstrate that you understand your audience's need and your audience's situation. So as a leader, I don't want you to tell me how good you are at your job. I want you to be able to know, I want to know how good, let me put that in a different way, I'm getting confused. I want to know how good you are at understanding my needs or the business needs and delivering a solution. And in doing it that way, I will know how good you are at your job. So what I want to bring this now to actually look at your sector of the IT and BPM sectors, and why is communication really important? Now, tech skills are absolutely great and you need them, and I am undoubted that you are all fantastic at your tech skills. But you need to be able to communicate to non-tech people like me. You will find in your career, there will always be someone or more people that you're going to have to be communicating with that just don't get the technical knowledge you have. It's no different from doctors, lawyers, artists, or accountants. This is more than just avoiding industry jargon. It's about, and you also need to be prepared for questions or to actually generate questioning when that's actually appropriate. And you can still generate questions in your written work, in your written communications, by the way that you phrase it, or you're asking for a call to action. We might call it recommendations, or purpose, objective, whatever you want to call it. It's a call to action. When you're writing or communicating with someone, what is it that you want to get out of it? So let me give you an example. I have two, this is a hypothetical, just in case, it's purely a hypothetical. Let's say I've got two equally skilled back-end developers as employees. One of those two can communicate to me the connection between her solution and our business strategy. She can explain very clearly and concisely what her solution does, and she is able to ask questions to make sure we understand what she's talking about. The other person can't do any of that. So I've exaggerated I've put this into two deliberate extremes. The only one of these it's only one of those two people that really has a broader value to me, and only one of them is going to be in line for a promotion. India's IT and BPM industry currently employs around 4.5 million people, if my research is correct, and at least 50% will require reskilling within the next 2 years in key technical areas, whether that's, I can roll some of them off, and I know some of these ones: cybersecurity, VR, AR, AI, robotics, big data, and of course, huge one that we've seen this year, mobile computing. And as Venkat said at the start of this, this year we've just seen communication on a scale like we've never seen before. We are communicating about a pandemic that we have never had since, certainly within our lifetimes. We're communicating with colleagues and with clients without any form of face-to-face contact. And so we're missing different types of cues. I can't see anyone in the audience here. Normally when I do something like this, I can see faces, I can see what people are doing. I can hone in on someone. Venkat can't see that I'm actually looking at him at the moment. And I don't know if you've done this in meetings, but I do it sometimes when I ask someone a question. I forget that they can't see that I'm looking at them, and I've got to mention their name. So, we have to change the style that we go about in this format. So look, and certainly for me, I've been sitting at home for 10 months. The last time I was in my office, I've been in my office twice in the past 10 months, and I was only there with one other person, and that was to enable them to get new starters to get a laptop and be able to connect onto the network, get themselves started, and off they went. So if you're introducing new tech, how do you communicate its best use, its functionality, and why the tech is being deployed. As I said earlier, communication falls within an area of human-centered skills or professional skills. They're transferable. They're the skills, and the reason we call, I know, certainly on the platform and within FutureSkills, we're calling them professional skills. I really love the phrase human skills, because these are the skills that really cannot be automated. You cannot automate good communication. You cannot automate innovation and creativity and problem solving as easily as you can other things. So think of your professional skills, whether it be communication, problem solving, collaboration, as equally as important as your technical skills. Remember, and if you always are thinking about your audience, remember that the professional skills are the skills that add value to an employer. As a CEO, that's what I'm looking for. And that's what your CEO will be looking for, and your future employers. They're looking for people who are well-rounded, who have technical knowledge and the professional skills, because if you only have technical knowledge, you will only get so far. So keep those in mind. And I'm conscious of my time, so I'm coming to an end. So I don't have much more here, which is good to talk about, and we'll hand over to you in questions. But let's just have a little bit of a look at a couple of extra things that we've seen happening this year that will likely go forward. Hybrid working. Now this will vary, but we'll start seeing even more conversation of this as we go forward. Unfortunately, being removed from India, I'm not hearing it as much of what's happening there, but I can tell you about what's happening in Australia, in Europe, I've heard on the news, and less so actually in America. Well, America seems to be black and white, so let's just forget them for now. But there will be an element of hybrid working. We are seeing already job search criteria from job applicants. The one search criteria that has exponentially grown is flexible work arrangements. So if employers do not offer flexible work arrangements, work from home, they're simply not going to get the best applicants applying. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. So again, how do we look at the way we continue to do this type of work in a different way? So we might be in the office sometimes, but not always. Some of our team might be in the office, some might be on a screen. So those different styles of communication are still important. We're also seeing our learning change from face-to-face to online. That brings itself a whole lot of fundamentally different changes in the way that we learn. We're seeing increased speed, agility, and flexibility in every aspect of work, from product development to transition of work arrangements to rolling out of tech. And of course, what we're also seeing is this complementarity of skills that I started off with: problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking. You know, critical thinking is about logic, reason, research, insight, creativity, but you still need that communication element to go with it. Yes, critical thinking is important. Collaboration, without a doubt, is fundamental to the way we work and the way we start creating ideas and generate ideas. But again, we still have to communicate to be able to work in a collaborative environment. And the other one that's really big is digital literacy. And that's more than just understanding and saying, oh, I know how to work, you know, on different digital platforms. It's actually also understanding the right use for different platforms in the right circumstances. Now, DeakinCo are launching 2 communication courses on the FutureSkills platform, and they'll be free for the next 6 months. So I encourage you, go check them out, undertake them, give us your feedback. And that's what we'll be after once they're released, is your feedback, to look at what are the next types of courses that you're interested in that human-centered skill or professional skills that we can bring to you. Thanks, and I'll hand back over to Venkat for question time, just as the rain starts coming down in Melbourne.
That was a wonderful talk, Glenn. A lot of important points that you talked about. if I have just to pick up some of the important ones that you talked about, or the key ones I would say, is one, you talked about how the social and the business communications, while they are distinct, but somewhere they're sort of coming closer together, be the formal, informal communication as well. You also talked about the structure of communication. So that's very important in terms of bringing clarity. And I think today's world, there's a lot of talk about storytelling, right? So how do you sort of relate this with that? What do you see as a linkage there?
Yeah, look, storytelling is so powerful because, and you'll see, I actually put a couple of those little stories into what I was talking about because it really brings home, people can relate to a story. That's why storytelling is really important. And I know, yeah, on the platform, it's called, the area of professional skills is called communication and storytelling. And I think that's fantastic because we can all see a little bit of ourselves or someone we know when we hear a story. That's why it's important.
Absolutely. And I think you did mention about being precise. You talked about the example of a scientist. I think that's something which is very critical because, as you mentioned, a lot of people who are technically very good, but unless you're able to put forth your point or viewpoint or the ideas that you have, it doesn't really reach the end of it, right? So in terms of generating questions, I generally use a couple of acronyms, which I just want to share with the audience. When you talk about question, it's an art of questioning, right? So how do you really pick up a point? I call it as an ABQ, which is asking better questions, and ACQ, which is asking clarifying questions. I think this is very important, especially when you're in a conversation. How do you derive more out of that? Because the person may not be in a position to really call it out, but can you as a leader sort of derive that? I think that's something which is very important. You did mention about all the 4 E's as well: the engagement, expertise, evidence, and empathy. I think which is absolutely critical. And I've listened this earlier as well. You say that communication is always a function of other person's listening. It's not about how good you are. And I was able to relate to that when you mentioned about knowing the audience. It's so important to know the audience because you might be thinking you're doing really well, but if the audience is not able to get it, it's not really worthy. Right? So that was something that was very important for me. There are a couple of questions which just come up. There's a question which says, how should employees think beyond their individual growth and contribute to organization's growth beyond their job role? How can they prepare themselves to change the mindset in terms of communicating with the leaders?
Yeah, look, fantastic questions. Look, part of this is understanding a little about where, so one of the things I've always done is to find out what gets their attention. Ask colleagues what's worked in the past. If they're going to, if you've got a leader that is speaking at a conference or a webinar, tune in, listen to what they talk about and find those cues. When you're also talking, or if you've got to write a report for them and you're struggling with it, the best way I find, and I coach people about this, when you first write something, if you're struggling, write it as if you're speaking it. That's much easier to then refine it into a written form. Whereas a lot of people start thinking there's this, you know, sort of complex black box of how do I write properly. Start with how you talk and then you can go back and adjust it. But in terms of knowing your audience, see what's going on, you know, listen to your leaders speak. If your leader is writing posts, get into those and have a look at what is important. So do some analytical work, you know, find out what are the elements that's on the agenda. What's the strategy? What's the company's strategy? What's the biggest ticket item going on at the moment? Or what's also happening in your industry? Search your own company, see what's happening in the news. They're the sorts of things that will help you understand what's on the mind of your leader, or if it's someone outside, say it's your biggest client, you do the same things. They're the exact same things that you need to do. Listen to them, find out what's going on in the news for them, look at their strategy, look at their website. That will help you understand how you're going to frame your conversation. If you can start picking up, even if you're not quite sure it's going to hit the mark, if you can pick up on a few of the key points that is going to grab that's on their mind, and as a CEO, if you're in the news, believe me, that's on your mind. And if you're a client, see what's their big ticket item. And if you can weave that in and what you're talking about fits that, you're halfway there.
Thanks, Glenn. I think the summary of that is there is no secret sauce. They have to do the groundwork as well to understand the audience better, what the needs are, and then tailor it accordingly. So there's some interesting questions coming up. There's one which says, what are some tips for effective communication, given that others, we can hardly assess body language while on a virtual call? So what's your take on that?
So in this way, it is a lot harder. I've got to say it is really much harder. One of the things that we've certainly been finding here in Australia, and because we have the bandwidth for most of the country that enables us to keep our video on, and I know that's not where you're at in parts. We've actually found this less in the informality of it. So you can see, you can all see my living room, and I'm surprised that none of you have yet seen one of my cats. But we find this level of, and I can see Ravneet's face because she's seen all of them. And they quite often come up and they'll walk in front of the camera, or they'll sit here and watch what's going on the screen. We've actually been finding this is softening business, and it's strangely replacing what we would normally do as a sense of warmth in a business meeting. By being able to see some of that personal aspect to our life, because we're not seeing all of the emotions, we're not getting the body language, we're not, everyone's this same flatness. What we're finding is that this is bringing in a level of personalization that enables us to connect in a different way, but as a substitute for the cues that we're missing. It's not the same as being able to get back in person. But it is really important that we can in fact engage. One of the other things here is there's sort of the added onus to engage in a virtual environment is put on every individual. Whereas normally if we're sitting in a meeting, the chairperson, whoever's chairing the meeting, will be able to do that because they'll go around the room and say, Venkat, what are you thinking? Oh, it looks like you've got something, it looks like you have something to say. We don't get that in this environment. So the onus to speak up goes on to the individual.
Can I also sort of add on and say that I think one of the main aspects of communication is also listening, I think, and perception. I think a lot of it has to do with how you perceive things and how you relate to it. It's all about a relational association that you establish. Like Glenn's talking about, sitting in a living room, or actually even in sometimes having family around. Sometimes you form a sense of connection with the person, not necessarily with just the body language, but also the words spoken, the facial expressions, and the need to engage differently. So coming back to your question about in a virtual world, it's limited, but it's different. And I think that's one part of picking up as we go into the future with how this has changed our lives in communication.
Right.
Yeah.
If I might just add, right, when you talk about the virtual world, while I do understand the body language and the other things are not that visible unless you have a video on. Even with the video on, probably you're just able to see some part of it, right? But I think the voice modulation becomes even more important in the virtual world, because certainly, like, even if you're smiling, even if you're not on a video and you're smiling, I think it's quite evident in your tonality. So I think that's where the intent also comes in. If the intent is really there, if you're really smiling or being happy for someone, I think the other person gets it.
Yep. Yeah, well, that comes in even on for call centers. One of the first things that is taught to people in a call center environment is when you're talking to the customer on the phone, smile, because your smile will come through in your voice. And I think that comes back into this environment as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are quite a lot of interesting questions coming up. I know we have limited time, so I'll just try and pick up a few. So there was one question which says, what's that? Okay, how important communication skill compared to other skills from the point of a recruiter? Also, please give the answer in terms of percentage.
Look, I think this is one that varies, but what I look at is less about individual surveys that are coming out and more about the longitudinal view of what we're seeing in those surveys. So, you know, look, LinkedIn just put one out a few, I think about 3 or 4 months ago that said, you know, top 5 were creativity, persuasion, I'm reading it, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. Interestingly, they only had 5, and they had 10 technical skills. Look, in terms of for recruiters and people looking for jobs, it's still around those things about what is human and how does this person add value in the organization. The things that we are consistently seeing through these surveys are collaboration, communication, or teamwork. Sometimes it's expressed as teamwork, critical thinking, problem solving, innovation, creativity, and the emerging one that we're seeing is this element of digital literacy. So this wasn't there about 4 or 5 years ago. It is definitely there now. Percentage-wise, I really don't know because it will depend on what you're looking for, but they're the ones that tend to always be in the top.
But as a recruiter, I think communication plays an extremely important role because, like they say, one is your knowledge and one is the ability to package it and showcase it. And unless and until you are not able to do that to the recruiter, you do stand a chance of losing out. So as a recruiter, I mean, when I interview people, of course, body language and all is important. But at the same time, I think the ability to communicate and answer, if I've asked a question, you could give me the whole knowledge about something I'm not interested in. So really picking up what you want to communicate with me and establish that connect of maybe what I want to hear. I think that is an important part of communication as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one other question which has come up. Is it important to give examples while speaking on some topic so that people could relate to it? I think that was quite evident when Glen spoke as well. He used a lot of his personal experiences. So I think it's better to use your own personal experience. That way you're sharing your vulnerabilities. You're able to build your credibility and build the trust as well. So Glen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, look, you're spot on. It's spot on, Venkat. You know, this is the element of storytelling. It builds trust. It builds connection. And if you wherever you are, even if you're in the job interview, that, believe me, is going to count. You know, I've sat through times where I've interviewed 5 people in a day, and the bits that I remember, and sometimes in fact, I was doing some job interviews early today. I won't flash that up because that's confidential. But sometimes I write little notes about a personal anecdote that someone says, so that when I'm then assessing everyone at the end, I'll go, oh yeah, she talked about where she, you know, like this one, she talked about Eltham. Now Eltham's a suburb in Melbourne, but that rings a bell, and now all of a sudden I can bring back everything that she spoke about because of that personal anecdote. Whereas someone that didn't give me anecdotes, who I don't have here because this was 3rd round interview, they don't get through to 3rd round interview if I can't remember an anecdote and I don't have something that I connected with.
Okay, thanks, Glen. I think in the interest of time, we'll probably stop with the Q&A here. There are a lot of interesting questions, and I think a lot of them were answered when Glen spoke about in terms of what are the tips on effective communication. He did share about this 4 E's as well, which is very important. So I would like to thank the team here, all the audiences have joined in. Thanks, Glen and Mark and Ravid as well. I know Glen and Mark, it's a Christmas vacation time for you, but you've still taken time out to come and talk about here in this webinar. So really appreciate that. It means a lot about the partnership as well and how much you really want for people to get benefited out of this. And I think you did talk about the digital literacy, how that is important. And when the poll came up, I was thinking ideally there should have been an option saying all the above, because all of them are interconnected and very relevant in today's world. But yes, there is the underlying thing is where the communication comes in, because even if you have digital literacy, you need to communicate that. You want collaboration, communication is important. So I think communication sort of becomes the backbone of that. So, and this is something that we've been focusing at FutureSkills as well, and really looking forward to our partnership here. Really appreciate you actually putting up 2 of your courses on the platform. For the audience here, for all the users who are on FutureSkills platform, we have 2 levels. One is the foundation and one is the proficient level communication courses, which are available for free for 6 months. So really want to thank Deacon for that. And we also, looking at the success that we had with the FutureSkills, the government has also partnered with us, and we went live with a beta version of what we call as the FutureSkills Prime. This is a B2C platform, which is intended to really cater to all the Indian citizens above the age of 18, to make sure they're getting skilled, they're staying relevant, that's something which is very important today. And the ultimate objective for the FutureSkill initiative as well is to make sure that it becomes the global talent hub. And all these that we're doing here is only small measures that we're taking towards that goal. And once again, I want to thank Deacon for the partnership here. Really, really appreciate that. And Glenn, Mark, everybody here, and people on the call as well. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year as well. And I'm sure you would actually visit the FutureSkills, make use of these courses which are available, and become more proficient with your communication.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.